I have help from my wonderful daughter Delaney here tonight, who has helped me countless times in the past with classes. Delaney's looking at her Instagram feed now. Is it looking okay?
You have 40 people on.
Holy crap! Thanks, guys. Cheers to that. 40 people, she said. So
55.
we'll get right into it. I'm going to figure out a way to repost this video after we're done. Delaney's watching for questions. We're going to shoot for 30 minutes of demo, starting with the raw brisket. We've got a brisket outside that'll be ready to wrap in exactly 14 and a half minutes. So we'll do that, and then we'll take our cooked brisket out, we'll carve it up. We should be able to get through this in about 30 minutes. I love talking about brisket so much. So I'm a little worried about going over that 30-minute mark. We're going to try to save the answers until 7:30, which is half an hour from now. So I'm going to get right into it. Delaney's watching for questions. If there's anything particularly urgent, she will raise her hand and let me know. Do you want to come on camera and say hi?
No.
That's a no tonight. Okay. Well, I'm going to get it right into it, guys. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I greatly appreciate the support. Greatly appreciate the attention. Not attention, but I greatly appreciate people caring enough to watch. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to cut right into this right away here. What we have here is a whole brisket. Cryovac packaging. Exactly how that whole brisket comes from the packing plants. We're in Saskatchewan, Canada, so of course most of our brisket comes from Alberta. We are looking at 8 kilograms here, so roughly 17 and a half, maybe 18 pounds. This is the big one. I do like the big briskets. I'm not particularly opposed to small briskets, but bigger briskets give me the best opportunity to have a brisket that ends up nice and moist.
I think they like when you slap your meat.
Yeah, that's not going to stop anytime soon either. So, it does happen to be a habit of mine. So as you can see, I very carefully just kind of opened the top of this cryovac bag. We'll remove that. Often there's liquid water sitting in the bottom of that package. I do not want that spilling all over my table, so we'll put that out on the cutting board. This is a particularly wet brisket, so just going to get in here and sop up some of that extra moisture that's on here. Flip it over here. We are going to trim this thing. I'm going to work pretty quickly. Again, I'm trying to get through the whole cook in 30 minutes here. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to assume that nobody's cooked a brisket before. I understand many of you have. Maybe there's been some challenges, and that's why you're here. But pardon me for getting down to the basics, but that's what we're going to do here. So your basic whole brisket here has a flat muscle on top. Actually, Delaney, I would appreciate it if you could pick up the phone and zoom in now, because we're kind of far from the camera. Okay, we're going to zoom in here shortly. So we have the flat muscle of the brisket, which is obviously flat. You see the grain all running in one direction. That flat muscle runs right from the tip here to about here. Flip it over, and I'll point out the point muscle of the brisket. Point muscle is at the other end, the thick end. Point muscle on this brisket runs from about here to here. So those two muscles overlap. That's part of the challenge of cooking a whole brisket. We're going to get in here and we're going to identify some of this fat vein that runs through the middle here. Let me just get in here and start trimming. So right off the bat, I see this big thick decal of fat here. We're going to get in and trim that out. This does not add anything to the cooking process. Get rid of that. This vein of fat runs and separates these two muscles here. So you can kind of see a hint of it on the surface here. We're going to trim some of that out. I'll talk briefly in a moment about why I want to do that. But you can see the shoulders, that decal of fat that runs on either side of the brisket. You'll see that on both sides here. So I'll get rid of that. And as we start to pull that fat out of that vein there, it starts to open up this point muscle. Okay, really important because this point muscle is obviously the thickest part of the brisket. By removing this fat vein in here, we open up that point muscle, which gives it a much better opportunity to fully render, to get tender. Okay, I'm going to start to trim off this fat cap that's wrapping around the end here. This is the point where we start to realize how much we paid for this brisket and how much we're tossing out. If you're somebody that makes sausage or have friends that make sausage, you can definitely save a lot of this fat for them. Flip this around, and I'm going to draw particular attention to the edge of the brisket here. That's the edge of the carcass when it's hanging in the processing plant. Sometimes it's gray, looks a little mealy. We're just going to cut that off. That's just a result of the process they go through to kill any surface bacteria that remain on the carcass. There's nothing wrong with it. It won't hurt you, but rub doesn't stick particularly well to it. So we'll lose that, clean up that edge a little bit. Okay, I'm coming back to this fat vein that runs between the two muscles here. So I've pulled a lot of this fat out right here and around the other side right here. Again, that opens up the point muscle. A lot of times people cook brisket. I saw it on a Facebook group today, and they worry that the thickest part of the brisket is going to take much, much longer to cook. This is the trick here. You want to get rid of that, all that extra fat in here. All it's adding is time to the cooking process. So this opens up the point muscle. Good opportunity now to identify the difference between the two muscles. This flat muscle, it's quite lean, right? See the amount of marbling in there? There's not a lot of fat marbling through there. If I take that same cross section of the point muscle, okay, you can see quite a dramatic difference. There's a lot more of that white substance, white marbling. That's fat, and it's also collagen or connective tissue. That's what makes a brisket so tough. But over the course of cooking, if we're doing low and slow, we could be talking up to 12 or 14 hours. All of that collagen breaks down. And once it breaks down, it adds a lot of moisture to the meat, adds a lot of flavor to the meat. So that's a good thing. This point muscle is going to have more of that moisture in the end by the time we're done. Okay, so that's about it for the bottom side of the brisket here. Let's flip it over, look at the fat cap.
Reconnect. Okay, you can keep going.
Okay, thank you.
It was reconnecting.
A little bit of buffering there. Sorry, guys. My goal here is not to trim this fat cap off completely. My goal is to trim it down to roughly 1/4 inch. A lot of people leave this fat cap on. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not here to criticize anybody's cooking style. But I find that by removing it, it allows that bark to build up on the meat that we're going to keep. Right? I run a business. We serve barbecue to people on our food truck and catering and festivals. I do not want to serve somebody a big slab of fat on their bun, right? So we'll trim this down to about 1/4 inch. My goal is to have a nice thin little ribbon of fat on the finished product. We'll get her down to about 1/4 inch, maybe a half, not a quarter, 1/8 inch to 1/2 inch on the finished brisket. I do want to leave some fat on here. Most smokers, you'll find that the meat's rising up from the bottom. And by leaving this thin little layer of fat, it kind of protects the lean meat underneath it, especially with this flat muscle here. By leaving that 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch of fat on here, it helps prevent the meat from drying out. It helps prevent the meat from forming a really dry, crusty, maybe chewy bark. I want that dry heat to be hitting this thin layer of fat on here. I don't want it to be hitting that lean meat on that flat muscle. So we'll trim her down. Okay, I'm working pretty fast here. This probably isn't the most precise job. It does help to have a sharp knife. I guarantee you that. You can get a cheap knife really sharp. The challenge is keeping it sharp. But do a little research. There's some good YouTube videos on sharpening. Highly recommend checking them out, but a sharp knife makes a big, big difference here. Okay, just coming back. This again is the flat muscle here. Every brisket's different, but every whole brisket is going to have that flat muscle and the point muscle. There's always that vein of fat that separates the two. This is the point muscle right here. Just kind of going to get in, trim off the excess fat. Okay, I'm looking for any extra flaps, loose pieces of meat in here, which are going to turn into jerky over the course of a 12 to 14 hour cook. And that's really about it. I guess we've got a little chunk of fat here. We'll get rid of that. But I'm happy with that trim. Again, there was a big patch of fat that didn't even exist on the brisket. It got hacked off during the process, during the slaughtering process. not too worried about that. This point muscle has lots of that fat and collagen. The flat muscle here, which is the leaner of the two, I'm going to leave that 1/4 inch of fat cap on there. One more quick look at the underside of the brisket. Flat muscle here, point muscle here. That's pretty typical for my trim for a backyard cook. If anybody's curious about the process we use for competition, we do separate these two muscles completely when we're cooking for judges. The reason is that allows me to cook each of these two muscles to the perfect point of tenderness. Really important in competition barbecue. So for backyard cooks or basically any other brisket that I personally serve, this is how we cook it right here. Next step, of course, is to get in here with some spice rub. It helps sometimes to use what's called a binder on here, which could be cheap mustard, it could be beef stock, things like that. This particular brisket has lots of surface moisture, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. But we're going to get in here and we're going to apply the spice rub here. Before I do that, let me talk quickly about different ways to really elevate your brisket to the next level. My goal here tonight is a simple brisket that's going to come out amazing. If it was competition, I'd be doing a little more work to it. We have a nice little injector here. This is actually like an agricultural livestock injector. I'd have a juice here ready at the go. Pull that juice into the cylinder here. Flip it over. And I'd inject this flat muscle, right? Probably every square inch or so, just inject a pump of liquid in there. It's a good way to add extra moisture to the flat muscle. It's a good way to ensure that the flat muscle doesn't lose a lot of its natural moisture. If you're going to do an injection, I do recommend use a commercial beef injection. I've got a couple of different brands at the ready here. Big Papa Smokers, Cattle Prod, Blues Hog, Beef Marinade. Just follow the instructions on the label. You're going to mix these with water to create a solution. And these commercial beef marinades contain an important ingredient called phosphates. Phosphates allow beef to retain its own natural juices a little bit easier. Phosphates don't have any actual taste to them, but they do, again, almost guarantee a juicy brisket in the end. So we're not going to worry about that. They are not a requirement to produce a good tasting brisket. But in the world of competition where trophies are important, that little extra step does help. So let's get into the rub here. We're not going to worry about injections today. So this particular brisket, we are going to stick with my 2021 competition program, which has not been proven yet, other than an event in Calgary, Alberta last September called Barbecue on the Bow. And that was 50% tumbleweed, 50% steak shake. It did not get us first place, but it did get us an award in brisket. I can't recall exactly where we placed in brisket, but we did win the competition, so it helped. So we're going to go on there, make sure we get the edges of that brisket all the way around. I'm going to do a light coat of the tumbleweed, and another light coat of the steak shake. I do like to let spice rub rain down from 6 to 12 inches above the brisket. I want a nice even coating of that spice rub. There's no need to physically rub it into the beef. We're going to pat it down, make sure it sticks really well. Get in here with the steak shake. Do one more layer of rub. I'm looking forward to the questions. Again, my goal, guys, is to cover a really basic technique for cooking brisket that's going to almost guarantee great results every time. Making a mess on the table here, but that's okay. All right, when we're comfortable that we have a nice thick coating of spice rub on there, we're going to stop. Ideally, I would want to apply this spice rub 30-45 minutes before the meat goes on the smoker. You can do it a day ahead if you'd like, but I find that it doesn't make a tremendous difference in the results. What I'm looking for is the salt content of the spice rub is going to start to draw some moisture up out of that meat. And when it does that, you'll be able to see that the surface of this meat turns shiny. It starts to glisten a little bit. Right? It looks a lot more wet. And that's what we're looking for. That wet surface, by the time we introduce it to the smoker, it's going to help draw that smoke in. It's going to help enhance the smoke ring. And both of those things are definitely desirable. So let's set this aside for now. I've already cooked 2 briskets today, so we're going to set this one aside and cook it tomorrow. Delaney, when you get a chance, if you could please set that aside. Do we have any critical questions about the process so far?
Not about the process, just about it. Not really.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go outside and we're going to pull the brisket off the smoker and we're going to wrap the one we have cooking.
Ooh, there's a booty.
Booty. Nice. Yeah. All right, so we are cooking tonight on Gateway Drum Smoker. This is a hot and fast process, guys. And I don't want to spend too much time on cooking process tonight. I'll touch on it a little bit. If you're cooking on a pellet grill or a normal charcoal smoker, for example, you're cooking at 250, you're planning for 10 to 14 hours, depending on the size of the brisket. I always want to have that brisket done and resting, 1 to 4 hours before I plan on carving into it. That way I can guarantee that it's done. I don't want to be fighting with a stubborn brisket 20 minutes before serving time. Every brisket is different. It's really hard to predict exactly how long they'll take. So you can look for hours per pound as a rough guideline. The drums are what we use in competition. We generally look at 4 to 4.5 hours total cook time on here. We're cooking at 300 to 325. As you can see, we've got that needle sitting right around 300 right now. We're going to take it, peek inside.
It's like
This brisket
275.
should be ready to wrap. Now it is almost minus 20 Celsius right now. But the Gateway performs like a champ. I'll show you what we're looking at. So that's our flat muscle. Okay, I would like a little more color on there. I'd be leaving this on for another 15 minutes or so. But the brisket doesn't matter. You guys matter. So we're going to wrap it up. Okay, let's come back inside. Throw that in the pan for now. Close the garage door, please. I guess you can set that phone up first.
This is so hard. It's actually a struggle.
You're doing fine.
No, I'm not.
Take this with you, please, and set it aside.
Okay, wait.
And close the garage door.
I'm so cold.
Exactly. Okay, garage door closed. Rob's making a mess. Time to wrap this brisket up. Don't be shy with the foil, guys. Sorry about the garage door noise. I'll just give it a minute. I got 4 words for you if you've never wrapped a brisket before. Wide, heavy-duty foil. If you're in Western Canada, Sunspun is the best out there, and it's also quite affordable at wholesale clubs. I'm going to do 2 sheets. We're cooking hot and fast, and the risk of this foil getting punctured is high. I do not want to lose all the juice in here. That's going to lead to a burned brisket. So we'll start with 2 sheets. We're cooking hot and fast today because it's my favorite way to cook and it produces a damn good brisket. So we have that brisket sitting on our foil. Okay, make a little bit of a boat with our foil here. And to that, we're going to get in here with a couple ingredients.
Okay, he's back.
I'm back?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that, guy.
Okay. You're back.
Okay,
Good.
hook it up and check your phone. I see myself on your phone.
Yeah, you're
Lawrence?
good. Just wait. No, it's
Okay.
that I can't get this in.
Okay. You know, we're not professional videographers here, guys. We're just barbecuers.
Hey, that's a dig at me. You're not even doing any of this.
All right. We're good? Okay, sorry about that. We'll carry on here. So again, let me backtrack. I don't know how much you missed. Dash of spice rub on that brisket again. Okay, the hot and fast method generally tends to produce a lot of moisture rushing to the surface of the meat and running off the sides of the brisket. This spice rub is an extra way to make sure we have lots of flavor on the crust there. So, gonna get in there with some beef broth. This hot and fast technique tends to extract a fair bit of moisture out of the brisket, which gets trapped in the foil. So you don't need a lot of beef broth right now. But my goal with that beef broth is I want that flavor, I want that juice when we're done the brisket. So we'll carefully get in here and wrap this brisket up. I'm looking for sharp edges of that brisket. Those sharp edges are a risk factor when it comes to puncturing the foil. This particular one looks okay. And I just punctured the foil underneath. So we're going to have to go with 3 layers tonight. Okay. Let's get that wrapped up. What's the time?
7:24.
Okay, we have 6 minutes left to conclude our brisket lesson. I am using foil. Let me talk about that a little bit. Butcher paper has taken the internet by storm in the last couple of years. And there's reason for that. You know, the sexiest brisket in the world right now is coming out of Texas. Aaron Franklin especially, and a lot of those guys use butcher paper. The idea with butcher paper is that it tends to produce a brisket that has a little more texture to the bark. That butcher paper, as long as it's unlined, does lead to a brisket bark that's got a little more texture to it, right? So if you're looking for that peppery, real bark texture the brisket is famous for, butcher paper is a good way to get there. My preference, coming from a competition background, is foil. Foil gives you the opportunity to trap that moisture in there. Beef broth, maybe some bourbon, that's the flavor that complements brisket pretty well. All those liquid flavors tend to do better in a foil package, right? Paper does give you an increased risk of that liquid leaking out. When I'm done here, that liquid that I've added is going to be absolutely delicious, concentrated brisket flavor. So we're going to take that into consideration when we slice our brisket and we serve our brisket. So my choice is foil 80 to 90% of the time. I get the paper thing, but we're sticking with foil. Again, this is a surefire method to produce a juicy, flavorful brisket every time. Paper, in my opinion, is a bit more of an advanced technique. So let's move on to our cooked brisket. Doing okay there, Delaney?
Yep.
Now, our cooked brisket is going to require something on my hand to reduce the risk of burning. I've got that handy, so that's good. It's going to require a sharp knife. We have the Route 83 Moquesson brisket slicer, so that's ready. When we're slicing a brisket, it's really important, guys, that we delay this process until we're actually ready to slice the thing, right? You don't want to slice a brisket and allow your guests to refreshen their drinks, go to the washroom, linger for 20 minutes before they actually come to the kitchen table. We're going to slice this thing immediately before we serve it. Let me think quickly about anything I've missed during this process. Cooking, if there's any questions, we'll answer them in the comments. Your typical brisket cook, low and slow, I looked at 250 degrees. Again, depending on the size of your brisket and your smoker, there's no way to predict exactly how long it's going to take, but we're going to budget 10 to 14 hours for most briskets on most smokers. The hot and fast brisket, we're cooking at 300 to 325. That hot and fast technique works exceptionally well on drum smokers.
Okay, he's back. I'm sorry, friends.
Okay, so Lena's gonna have to go touch the phone once every 3 or 4 minutes, I think.
Oh my god, okay. Just wait.
Want to just hold it?
No.
Okay.
Okay. There you go.
Alright, so we were talking about cooking brisket. The typical low and slow brisket, again, you want to time it so that your brisket is done several hours before you plan on eating it. That's really important. I do not want to be rushing a brisket at 5:30 when I know I have guests expecting to eat supper at 6 o'clock. So we're going to get in here right away. This particular brisket, 4 hours and 15 minutes from start to finish on the drum. We were cooking at 300 to 325 today. You can check my Instagram stories for some progress updates during the day. But it's been resting now for about 45 minutes. So we're going to get in here, we're going to carve this thing. I do like foil, and there's a lot of juice in here, so we're going to be really careful about how we extract this. I need you.
I'm going to get you a charger.
First, can you get me a solo cup from the cabinet over there? Look at me, over there. Blue solo cup, please. Upper left corner.
I got it.
All right. Touch that phone every
No,
2 minutes.
Your phone is dying.
Okay, go get that charger. Okay, brisket wrap foil juice. That is gold, guys. Be really careful with that. I did spill some here. I'll blame the bourbon. We have our whole brisket on the cutting board. It's time to carve this thing. Okay, quick overview of the brisket. My flat muscle is sitting on top. Flat runs from here to here. Point muscle at the other end. Okay, point muscle runs from here to here. Today we are going to separate those two muscles. Okay, and that's really easy to do. You can do it with a butter knife. We have a manager in our Ribfest operations who trains people to do it with their bare hands. Shout out to Matresa. That fat vein, very easy to glide your knife through. Whew, this brisket is still really hot. 30 minutes rest is not ideal. I highly recommend 1 to 4 hours. Okay, flat muscle, we're going to set that aside. That flat muscle is the leaner of the two muscles. We're going to make sure we set that aside and carve it last. Where's that paper towel? Doesn't matter.
Under your table.
We'll clean up later. So what I'm left with here now is the point muscle. And there's a bunch of things you can do with the point muscle. On catering and food truck, we carve it up, we mix it in with the flat, we serve it, everybody's happy. What I'm doing here now is just cutting off all that extra fat vein that's sitting on the surface of the meat here. Again, my preference is not to serve somebody a sandwich full of fat. We're left with this beautiful point muscle here. So what we're going to do now is the quick and dirty version of burn ends. Okay, got a good bark here. We're going to cut this point muscle up into cubes. Now, if you've been to Kansas City in the last 5 to 8 years, there's a number of new school barbecue joints that are crushing it in the burn end game. Q39, Plowboys, for a couple of small examples. Right? And what they're serving as burn ends is this well-rendered brisket point. And what we're looking for... Yes?
You gotta have somebody to taste it.
Oh, you want a sample? Is a really tender, well-rendered collagen and fat little flavor bomb here. Okay, there you go. You have to come on camera though. Give me a review.
You want to be honest?
No, I want you to say it's awesome. Okay, let's get rid of those burn ends. We'll set those aside.
Well, it's good. You could have cooked it longer though.
Oh, is that right? I told you to tell me it was great.
It was the best brisket I've ever had.
Here we go. All right. Carry on cutting this brisket point up into cubes. All right, next. Let's have a look at that brisket flat. Okay. Flip. My first inclination is to flip it over. I'm looking for that fat vein that separates those two muscles. Again, 100% my personal preference. If there's any excess fat here, we're going to trim it off right now, just because I don't want to serve a customer more fat than they're comfortable with. Okay. Really important with this flat muscle that we carve it against the grain. Maybe you can pull the camera off now.
Okay.
Of course, with this brisket on the cutting board, this nice dark bark that's formed.
Dr. Seuss.
Thank you. It's really hard to tell what direction the grain is running in. So I'm going to flip it over quickly. If you're not sure, just scrape off a little bit of this membrane on the flat muscle here. Okay, maybe zoom in right there. You can see that the grain of the meat is running in this direction. I want my slices to run perpendicular to that. Okay. And our goal here is a flat muscle that's really tender. It offers zero resistance when you pull it apart. That's what we're looking for in the competition world. At home, it's not as important, but you do want to serve meat that's tender. If it's still really rubbery at this point, it's an indication that the meat hasn't gotten to that point where it's fully tender. What I failed to do with you guys tonight is show you how I evaluate tenderness. And I don't have a probe thermometer handy.
Yes, you do.
That's
There's
how-
one on the garage door.
Okay, Delaney's going to grab a probe thermometer. I'm going to hold the phone. Meat. That probe into the meat and feel how much resistance there is. There you go. Okay, by sticking that probe into the flat muscle, good to go?
Yeah.
I want that probe to just slide in while this meat is still on the cooker or while it's still in process. That probe should slide in with very, very little resistance. My calibration is a plastic tub of soft margarine. You know, pull that out of the fridge and stick your probe in it. Understand what that feels like. That's what I'm looking for on this brisket. So this brisket hit that stage about 45 minutes ago now. We're cutting up those slices. And we're going to serve this thing. What time is it? 6 minutes overboard, guys. That's all right. There we go. As you can see, I'm trying to keep these slices close together as long as possible. The minute we open this up, right, you can see the steam starting to escape from those brisket slices. That means your meat is drying out. So we'll keep those slices nice and tightly packed together. Your guests are sitting at the kitchen table salivating from the smell in the room.
Sorry.
We're going to carefully move this brisket to our serving platter. In this case, a beautiful aluminum disposable pan.
Oh.
Thank you for the sound effects.
You're welcome.
And we're ready to serve, guys. And if there's any scraps on the cutting board, they belong to the chef.
That was classy.
So classy. All right. Oh, we missed something. That is 12 ounces of juice we extracted from that foil. We're not going to serve this without capitalizing on that juice.
It's a good drink too. I don't know.
It's a delicious
if that's
drink.
normal or not, but you know.
Yeah, throw it in the freezer, add it to a soup. So delicious.
Ice cream topping.
All right. That's it, guys. I mean, this is not world-class Instagram presentation, but that's our brisket. So, I'm sure I've missed a few things during our 38-minute presentation. Let's hear the questions.
I wrote them down for you.
Oh my God. There's a
You
lot of
told me to
questions.
write them.
I know. All right, you can mount that thing back on the board if you like. I need some paper towel.
Okay.
My hands got a little greasy.
Oh my God. Okay. Whoop.
Check the frame.
Yes.
I don't want anybody seeing the shit in my garage.
Nobody can.
Okay, good.
Okay.
All right. So let's look at some questions here. What grade of brisket do you prefer? The most expensive grade is definitely a good guideline. I'm in Canada, So for frame of reference, if any Americans are watching, my terminology may be a little off base. But minimum grade for me is Canadian AAA. That is generally the highest grade available to most Canadian consumers. If I can get prime brisket, I will snatch it up as soon as possible. I'm super excited because I just locked in an order of 60 cases of prime brisket for our food truck operations this summer. I love Wagyu brisket. That's what I turn in for competition. That's a whole other topic. Wagyu is especially delicious. And a huge shout out to Furtado Farms in Alberta for the Wagyu brisket we cooked in competition. Question number 2. How much shaping do you do? Example, rounding the edges. This sounds like a competition question. And I've changed my mind on this topic several times. Currently, I'm sitting in the position that I do not trim the edges of the brisket for the box. Simply because I think when you do that, you run the risk of crumbly edges when you slice that brisket getting ready to turn it into the judges. And if you're a competition cook, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I cook the whole brisket flat now. If the edges need to be trimmed to fit in the box, I do it when it's hot on the cutting board prior to turn-ins. Best way to get a nice solid bark, wrapping or not wrapping. Best bark is always not wrapping. Thank you for that question because I didn't touch on wrapping during the presentation. But my personal opinion is that it's really important to emphasize that wrapping in foil is an optional step. Okay? And I've done countless experiments on this. Wrapping in foil during the cooking process leads to a brisket that's got a little more moisture in the end. But there is a risk of losing some flavor, right? And the best example is 2 words, what I call pot roast. If you cook a brisket on a smoker for 5 hours and then wrap it up in foil and cook it for another 8 hours, chances are pretty good you're going to lose a lot of flavor from that meat braising in the foil. So my preference for maximum flavor is to wrap later in the process or not wrap at all. Coming from a commercial perspective, the meat we serve for catering and food truck and so on does not get wrapped at all. So you can definitely produce some pretty damn good brisket without wrapping. It depends on your smoker. If you're running a smoker that's got a high volume of airflow and low moisture retention, I guess, like most pellet grills, wrapping in foil during the cooking process is a good step. So happy to answer specific questions if you want to let me know what you're cooking on. Where do you get your wood from for your stick burners? That's a good question. I love it. I wonder if that's a Saskatchewan audience member. It varies. As long as nobody reports me, I bring some back from Vancouver Island. I like alder. I like oak. I did manage to get a full cord of oak from southeastern Saskatchewan a couple months ago. If you're in Saskatchewan and you're specifically looking for advice, feel free to email me. I'm happy to give you some advice. What internal temp do you wrap at? I literally don't know. Thank you for the question. That's a great one. I wrap when I'm really happy with the color of the brisket and the bark development of the brisket. If you wrap too soon, again, you run the risk of losing some flavor and you run the risk of washing off that bark that's already formed. So my preference for maximum flavor is always wrapping later in the cooking process. Internal temperature, honestly, 9 out of 10 internet articles tell you to wrap at a specific temperature. Guys, internal temperature is irrelevant. You wrap when the bark is really well set and it's got the color you like. Okay? Do you smoke fat side up or down? These questions are awesome. Most of the cookers I use have heat coming up from the bottom. Okay, that would mean a pellet grill, most charcoal smokers. I want the heat rising up and hitting a thin layer of fat. That means fat cap down. Okay, there's smokers out there on the market that have a different or better air circulation where the heat is concentrated coming in from the top. In that case, I would cook from the with the fat cap facing up. Let's quickly eliminate the notion that a brisket must be cooked with the fat cap down so the fat renders down and soaks into the meat. That's been disproven by science over and over again. So virtually always fat cap down as long as the heat's rising up from the bottom. What about butcher paper, then foil?
Okay, you're back.
Okay, I don't know why the phone keeps cutting out, guys. I'm so sorry. Delaney,
Uh-huh.
keep touching the screen every 3 minutes.
It's the phone's fault.
Yeah, touch the screen.
Okay.
Okay. I hope I didn't miss a question, guys, here, but what about butcher paper first, then foil? Let me define this. If we're talking about taking a whole brisket, wrapping it in butcher paper, and then wrapping it in foil, that defeats the purpose of either one. The foil traps the moisture in. The butcher paper allows it to breathe. I think using both materials is a waste of time. You may as well just use foil. If I didn't understand your question correctly, please feel free to message me later. Do you ever cook without wrapping in foil? Yes, absolutely. Maximum flavor, I cook without foil. I have a number of smokers, mostly commercial, that I cook briskets on start to finish without the use of foil. So typical example might be a Fast Eddie pellet cooker, FEC 120 or FEC 100. That is a smoker that's got a high moisture content in the cooking environment. So there's really no need to wrap the brisket in foil during the cooking process. That's typically what we cook our briskets on for food truck service. For example, if you have a cooker with a high airflow or a really dry environment, it tends to dry out that brisket bark little earlier than when that brisket's fully tender. So if your smoker has a drier environment, then wrapping is a good idea. Again, feel free to message me with your specific smoker for more specific advice. Do you ever use mustard as a binder? Absolutely. Mustard's a good binder. There's a number of liquids or pastes that you could use for a binder. I tend to do that if I feel like my particular brisket is a little on the dry side. The brisket we used tonight came out of a cryovac package with lots of moisture in there, so the surface of the meat was quite moist when we started. There was no need for a mustard binder on the brisket tonight. It depends on the meat, it depends on what your goals are. Drinking enough? No. All right. What temperature is hot and fast compared to low and slow? That's a really good question too. Low and slow is typically defined as 225 Fahrenheit. For the last 10 years or so, low and slow is typically 250 degrees. As long as I've been teaching these classes, I've talked about 250 as the magic number. Brisket, pork butt, ribs, and so on. Hot and fast depends on your cooker. On the gateways, 300 is hot and fast because it is a cooking environment that is high in convective airflow. It is high in radiant heat coming off the charcoal fire. A stick burner, typically hot and fast would be anywhere from 300 to 350. I've seen competition cooks that I know cook at 350 to 375 as a routine. So it depends on your cooker, but low and slow, hot and fast. Generally, low and slow would be 250 or below. Hot and fast would be 300 and above. Would leaving more fat on be better for hot and fast? Honestly, I don't really think so. I think as long as you have that minimum 1/4 inch, even 1/8 of an inch of fat on that brisket, that's enough fat to insulate the lean meat beneath it. I don't think more fat leads to a better result because that fat does not fully render out by the time you're done cooking. Delaney has more questions. How are we doing for time? 7:48. 12 minutes, guys. We're going to get through this. Can you double check the frame again? It seems like the camera's a little close. Where do you source your brisket? That is perfect. Yeah. I got to stop leaning over. Where do you source your brisket? All right, depends on what I'm using it for. Competition brisket comes from Brant Lake Farms in Okotoks, Alberta. Canadian Wagyu. It is amazing beef. If you're in Saskatchewan, look to Saskatchewan Snow Beef. I have yet to try their brisket, but I've cooked a number of their steaks, and it is amazing product quality. If I'm in the States, I typically order from Snake River Farms. Again, that's full Wagyu beef. For our food truck, catering, and so on, anything we do commercially in Regina, We buy lots of brisket, so we have to go through wholesalers, Cisco, Gordon Food Service, and so on. Minimum AAA. I buy prime when I can. What besides burnt ends can you do with a point? Burnt ends are the best food in humanity. What else would you want to do with burnt ends? I'll give it some thought later if you really want a good answer, but burnt ends, I mean, that brisket point contains so much collagen, some fat marbling, and so on. You really have to cook it for a long time to render that down, and burnt ends are the ultimate solution. I'll pick my brain. Whoever answered that question, I'm happy to answer it later, but I'm going to move on for now. I need to give that some thought. What did you do with the leftover juice? From the brisket point, we set it aside. If you really want me to be honest, we are serving collard greens from our Regina food service operations on Friday. I'm going to serve that leftover brisket juice in our collard greens this weekend, Friday. If you're left with a lot of brisket juice from that foil wrap, there are so many things you can utilize it for. Please don't throw it away. What do you use low and slow or hot and fast for Ribfest? Ribfest is a low and slower operation. Okay, we cook our briskets and our pork butts overnight. That gives our crew a chance to sleep for a change. So that means 12 to 14 hour cook for our briskets and pork butts overnight. When we come back in the morning, we pull that meat off over a 2 hour period, and then we start firing ribs all day. Commercial smokers at Ribfest generally run at 250 to 275. We cook ribs in a time period of 3 to 4 hours, so that's typically low and slow. Those smokers do cook pretty fast, so it's hard to differentiate. Thoughts on ceramic charcoal grill for brisket? Yeah, ceramic grills are awesome. Ceramic grills tend to give off heat from all directions at the same time, which means your brisket's going to cook a little faster, right? A brisket on a Big Green Egg or a Primo or a Kamado Joe is just going to cook from the bottom up, but it's also going to cook from the top down because that dome shell, that heavy ceramic, is going to radiate heat from the top down.
You're back.
You good? Anybody has tips on figuring out why my phone is freezing? I'd love to hear them. Any good Canadian offset smoker companies? I'll give you the two that come to the mind right away. Please forgive me if I miss anybody. I'm in Saskatchewan, so the two that come to mind right away are Bulldog Barbecues in Manitoba. It's the company that's been around for years and years. They produce a high quality grill, high quality smoker, worth checking out. The other one that's a little newer to the scene is Alberta Barbecues. Please don't quote me on the name. I've heard from a couple of their customers and they produce a pretty good result as well. Second last question. Do you notice a difference from frozen to fresh? In regards to brisket, I do not notice a difference. Okay, true story. The brisket we use in competition is Wagyu brisket, and whether I buy that from a Canadian producer or a US producer, it always gets shipped frozen, and it always gets us trophies. So I've heard from a number of high-profile American cooks who buy a high volume of brisket in the spring, right? What's today, January 3rd? February 3rd. Right? This is the time when cattle have a high amount of fat on their bodies to get through winter. I've heard from a number of high-profile American competition cooks who buy a significant volume of brisket in January so they can put it in their freezer with the mindset that cattle have the most fat volume on their bodies in the middle of winter. So I have no objection to frozen meat whatsoever. It certainly hasn't hurt our results in the past. I think that's a good quick answer. Wagyu price range. It varies. The Canadian producer I mentioned, Brand Lake Wagyu. I'm looking at $150 to $200 per brisket. They tend to be a little higher in the U.S. I buy all my American Wagyu brisket from Snake River Farms, located in Idaho, and they're a little more expensive. They range from $175 to about $250 US. That was pre-COVID. I don't know if their pricing is any different now, but you know, for the world of competition, unfortunately, that prize money and the trophy outweighs the cost of the brisket. So, if I want to win, and believe me, I compete to win, it's going to be expensive brisket. What do you do after cubing burnt ends? Personally, drizzle a little barbecue sauce on them and serve them. That's about it. If you have leftovers, you know, chop them up, throw them in a quesadilla, some tacos. They're pretty versatile. Burnt ends are awesome. Would you add a water pan to a pellet smoker? Personally, no. A pellet smoker, for the most part, is a smoker that has a high volume of air flowing through it at all times. Pellet smokers have a forced draft convection system, which means there's a fan blowing air into the fire pot, there's a fan adding air pressure to the cooking environment, and there's a fan that ultimately shooting air out of the smoker. My personal opinion is that a water pan adds very, very limited value to a pellet smoker because of the high volume of airflow moving through that smoker. Is that all the questions?
All the questions.
That's all the questions. And we're right on time. So listen, guys, I'm sure I haven't covered everything in regards to the world of brisket tonight. If you have any questions, I'm easy to track down, guys. Facebook message, email, comment on the Instagram post if we figure out a way to post this thing. We're going to do this every Wednesday night until things get busy, which means 2 months at least. And we're going to have a different topic every week. I have a number of guests I'm planning on bringing in to pick their brains because I'm not the expert. The world of barbecue is amazing because there is an unlimited amount of knowledge to soak in. There's an unlimited amount of lessons to be learned. So I plan on bringing in some guests to add an alternate opinion, maybe some guests with more experience in a certain area. We're going to have some fun with this thing. So clear your calendars for the next 8 weeks at minimum. We're here every Wednesday night. Again, if you have any questions, comment, send me an email, follow up. For anybody that stuck through this whole damn thing for the full hour, thank you. Have a great night.
Yes, I'm sure I want to end the live video, bro.
Wait, stop. Leave the phone alone.
No, it has to let me end it.
Yeah, let me end it. I'll save it.
Oh, this lady has a penguin as
End.
her profile picture.